Hello, and welcome to Radio NIGP. Our April episode continues to look at the subject of risk as it impacts procurement. Are you a procurement official, or are you a risk manager? Day to day, our job includes both functions. What can you do to balance those needs? So grab your drink of choice, sit back, and enjoy this episode of Radio NIGP.
Hello, everyone. This is Hot Topics, and today we're going to talk about emergency. What do you do? How do you prepare for them? We're going to throw it around to different team members on this one, but I want to just start out by saying one of the things that I do, or I thought about a lot, is what are the emergencies that I face? What's the likelihood of each? You know, I could think we have obviously tornadoes here, hurricanes here. We have earthquakes in Mississippi. I know, Kevin, you probably have a lot more in California than we do, but think things like wildfires. We had, an emergency at a dormitory where somebody was cooking in their room, burned it, the smoke detector went off, all the sprinklers went on. So we had a whole floor of students that we had to find a place for. So what are the emergencies you're going to face? What's the probability of them? And what's the impact if it happens? Clearly, the probability of a epidemic or worldwide pandemic is small, but gosh, the impact is huge. So, and then also, what do we need in each case? And if you can do that and come up with the top 10 potential emergencies that you could face and get to the point of being able to know what they are and what you're going to do in each one, I think if you're well on your way to having at least the start of a plan.
Well, I think you can have a plan, which is kind of an oxymoron when you think about it. You know, when you're planning for emergency, the very definition of an emergency is that something that is unplanned, right? Something that happened, right? And so, but when you do have those emergencies, your best hope is that it's not that worldwide issues, right? Because then you have more access to resources. But the biggest thing, I think, in terms of thinking about it, obviously in California we have this earthquake thing that happens, and it happens actually very frequently. It's just in small doses that we don't pay much attention to it, other than, oh, there's another earthquake, right? And so, but thinking about how do you mitigate some of these, or how do you get to sources, and one of the biggest resources that we have, obviously, are the co-op contracts that are out there. Accessing those co-op contracts is actually is one of the good resources that we have available to us. And the other piece is knowing that it is an emergency and a declaration can be had. It's pretty much, you can just go out there and do whatever. And so for us, one of the things that we do plan for, and we do have in place, and that is having our P card, that if triggered, certain people in the organization, their limits go from whatever $10,000 to $1 million pretty easily. And so, and that allows them to go ahead and make phone calls, place orders, because you never know if you need to rent or purchase heavy equipment, right? And so to clear out roads and whatnot.
So Kevin, I got a quick question on that. So let's say there is an emergency, you do need to bump up somebody's P card limit to $1 million. Do you have a process for that?
We do.
What does that look like?
Yeah, so it's simply, you go online, and the P card administrator go online and activate that emergency. It's a push of a few buttons. We haven't had to use it, and so
knock on that wood.
Knock on wood. But yeah. So another emergency that could happen, because we're a transportation agency, and we have union drivers, is when the union decide to go on strike, or when they are organize sick days, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a strike, a mean to strike, and the little things like that that could have an impact that I think that we could plan for or at least think about.
Well, I think you, Kevin, and Don kind of touched on this. I think if we plan ahead and think about emergencies, what we're really trying to do is not make it an emergency reaction. So to the rest of the world, a strike seems like an emergency, but to procurement, we're like, hey, we've got a plan in place. We know how to handle that. We have people that we trust to have a higher P card limit. We can handle that. As you guys were all talking, I was like, I live in Arizona, and I'm so fortunate because I can't think of like a natural disaster emergency that we really deal with. But one of the things when I was newer and green in procurement, that we have monsoons that come through Arizona, major lightning storms. And we had this one summer that we managed some water systems that the wells were struck by lightning. Like it was like one well was struck each week. And our process had been that procurement can make an emergency determination and we could do whatever practical competition was necessary to get things up and running when it was related to emergency. But when you're talking about well rehabilitations, you're hundreds of thousands of dollars, $250,000, $500,000. And our board didn't know anything about it because our process was we could determine the emergency, we addressed the emergency, and then once it was done, you took the full accounting to the board and you said, here was the reason we made the determination, here's what we did, now ratify all the decisions we made. And quite honestly, our board was getting ticked off at us for it. And they understood that it was emergent, but they were like, man, we've had $1 million worth of well rehabs because of electrical storms. And so one of the things we did, it's no longer even an emergency in Mojave County because I said, well, let's get some jocks in place. Then the board awards that jock ahead of time. We've got some established pricing, but there's a vehicle to deal with the emergent situation. And now it no longer feels like an emergency because everyone knows how we handle it. And so I think that's part of what you guys were getting at is like we plan ahead and we say, how likely is it? And then what's the detriment? And what can we do to mitigate it so that it's not an emergency?
And just to
in place.
Well, and just to clarify the terminology in case folks may not be aware of it, JOC is JOC, which is job order contracting.
Well, hold on, Kevin, real quick. I thought like jock was where you went to Dick's
football player.
Stop, Charlie.
All right. I was just curious.
I didn't even want to know where you're going with that.
But job order contracting is an IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity for public works.
Mm-hmm.
And so having a contractor, a job order contractor on hand, we can simply tell them what needs to happen, and then they price it for you. And then it's already been pre-priced and predetermined.
And you've already got insurance or bonds or whatever you might need.
Everything is already in place, and all you have to do is just mobilize the people. So that, and in most states, I shouldn't say most states, but in some states, we are not, like California, it's limited to certain types of agencies. And so we may not have that available to us, because it's illegal to have on-call public works contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And so
but I think the heart of it is still the same though. Like even if your emergency is snow, maybe you need to always make sure that you have a requirements contract in place for road salts or whatever it is. I'm not from a snowy place, but I think that's the heart behind it, is how do you get contracts in place that when you need the services, you already have a purchasing vehicle and a source selection method was already done, so that it's not, we have to rush and just pick a vendor and be at the mercy of whatever pricing they want to give us today.
And something on those contracts, we all have contacts with contractors. But one thing I learned is, 8 to 5, I know how to get a hold of them. How do I get a hold of them at 1 o'clock in the morning? And are they willing to accept that phone call at 1 o'clock in the morning? So contacting those contractors you usually do business with and finding out, are you willing to work with us on emergencies? If so, I need contact information. Here's mine. You can reach me in the middle of the night. Now, what about continuity of operation plans? Do you also have any of you have one of those in place?
So I'm going to step in real quick because the three of you just consumed all this time.
I know.
And, yeah, right. But like, I'll be real quick, Don, and because I know we're getting short on time too. But like, I'm very fortunate too here in Cleveland. We might get a tremor here and there. We may get an occasional tornado, high winds, things like that, but we're very lucky. But Tara said, snow. We do get hit with snow up here. And it all depends on which way the wind is coming off of Lake Erie. So on Lake Erie, it could be if the winds are coming off the west, the east side of Cleveland is getting 12 to 24 inches of snow, where me on the west side, I get 0. So it's crazy. The time we get dumped on is called lake effect snow, is when the snow comes out of the north, right off of Lake Erie, and then we get dumped on the west side. So we're fortunate here at Cleveland Metro Parks. We have a lot of things we do in house. We have our own plowing crew. If there's a lot of trees that get knocked down during a storm, or if we did have a freak tornado last October, we have our own crew that could come in and take care of a lot of manage our trees. But if we do have something in place, one of our director, he has the ability to go in and do some work with said contractor for emergency service. But Don, you asked about procedures. So it's very ironic. Like I actually put something in place like a year or two ago, probably 2 or 3 years ago. And the main thing was that I wanted to make sure that not just my team, but the entire park district was communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There has to be communication between procurement, our CFO, our CEO, our legal department, and we do have measures in place, and I won't go into all that jumbo. But the problem we were having when something emergency happened was lack of communication, and that's one thing I just kept. We had.
And when you don't have the communication established, you have people making a determination that may not have that authority. Yeah. They're moving forward with something, and then we become the department of no, where we're like, okay, we're going to find a way to make this work, but you should have never done that. You should have reached out to me. So, and I think for the continuity of operations, Don, it was something that we took the exercise because of COVID. What are we going to do to make sure that if something happens and everyone had to go home, how do we manage? One of the things that I noticed was in an emergency situation, I was the only one who had 24-hour access to our building and had 24-hour access to respond to things. And I've actually worked with our public works and said, all of my procurement officers need that access, because if we had a flood in the Colorado City area and we needed to come in at 2 a.m., I don't need to be calling facilities and saying, how can you get access to this person to come into the office to get their laptop or whatever it might be. So even just things as simple as thinking through, not just with contractors, but what do I need to do if an emergency happens at 2 a.m.? Do I just need to call someone and say, can you go to the office? Or does it all fall on me because I'm the one who has access? So we talked about making sure that we enabled access to PCs, etc.
And
during off hours.
I hate to do this, guys, because I'm cutting off communication, which is what Charlie said, and I'm cutting off access, which is terrible. But we do have to come to an end on this. This is a great conversation, and we could go on for hours. And I guess the biggest thing I would have to say right now is, for the people listening, get your staff together, get your people across your entity together, and have these discussions about what do we do in the case of an emergency? Because like Charlie and Tara were both saying, stuff happens. We've got to be ready, and communication is the key. But anyway, thank you, everybody. Thank you, team, for having a great conversation, and we'll see y'all next month.
Peace.
Hi, loyal Radio NIGP listeners. I'm Valerie Scott, and I'm joined today with my colleagues Bobby Tolston and Tara Acton, and we are here to share some of our favorite stories and memories about our fearless CEO, Rick Grimm. And one of the things I immediately thought of is how when I was very new in the profession and I'd heard all of these stories about Rick, especially coming from the RMGPA chapter, which he had been a part of, and he actually led the forum in Denver in 95. I had all of these stories in my head about Rick Grimm. And when I finally got the chance to meet him and I felt like a relatively new nobody, it was like he still cared to have the interaction, to talk with me, to learn about me. And as I think about the years as they go by, he really takes the time to get to know each of us. Anytime there was like an award or some special recognition that would come up in the NIGP forum letter goes out, he would always take the time to personalize it in his own handwriting, to write his name, to write a nice note, keep up the good work, or thanks for making RMGPA proud. And I think these are really special qualities that you don't often see in a CEO. And, as I've gotten to know him more over the years, my favorite new thing that I've learned is that he is the king of the dad jokes. He's just very relatable and down to earth. And I know Tara and Bobby, you both have also really awesome personal stories about how you've gotten to know Rick over the years.
Yes, Valerie, thank you. And I love receiving correspondence from Rick because it does feel personal. And I'll share a personal story. Uh, January 22nd, 2022, my brother passed unexpectedly. And needless to say, that was a very rough time in my life. And you all know if you've lost someone, how the letters and the calls start to wane. Well, one day I go to the mail and I open it up, and there was a card from Rick, and that uplifted my spirit. And when I saw Rick that year for Forum, he gave me a nice hug. But that just goes to the caliber of person that Rick is. He is definitely a human being, and every interaction with him is authentic and positive. And I always look forward to getting my nice bear hugs from him during Forum and kind of catching up. And he has an awesome memory for names. He'll often remember your name. He may remember what organization you're from. So personable. And he never runs away from people. You know how you see people and they see people come, they go the other way. He runs towards the crowd, never away. So thank you, Rick, for all of the great memories. Tara, I know you have a great story as well.
Yeah, I want to kind of touch on the Rick letters. I've got my screen blurred. Otherwise, I think I have a couple hanging on the cabinet behind me because they're just such good reminders of, being seen. And we've got 17,000 plus members, probably 1,500 that are active in some way with NIGP. And so to know that he does that probably for every single person, when you first get it, you're like, wow, I feel so special. And you do feel special, and it is special. But then when you think that he's doing that for everyone else, and like you said, Bobby, it's so genuine. That's one of those things, just Rick as a leader. Like I've tried to take that as well, even with my small staff, or when I was chair of the member council, like personalizing things and getting to know people. But then when you jump into I feel like there's the Rick as a leader for the entire organization and all of our members. There's Rick as a leader for the multiple volunteers that keep NIGP going and his staff. But then when you really get to know him, it's the genuine compassion and understanding for who you are and what you're going through. And so sharing the story about when your brother passed away, I can't think of a CEO of any organization that would take the time out to write a personal note to somebody and say, whatever it was, I know you're going through it. I know you're struggling, and not solve your problem, but just see you and validate you, not as the procurement professional or the member of NIGP or a leader in the organization. And for me, one of my stories was when I decided to come back to Mojave County. It's a much smaller area. Like I felt very disconnected from friends, but my family is here. But you weren't doing a lot of things with family because it was in the middle of COVID. And I called Rick about something NIGP related. And I knew he was busy. There were so many things going on. And he was like, sure, call me. I should be available around this time. And when he answered the phone, the first thing he asked was how I was. And he spent a good 15 minutes talking about, do I regret the move? Am I feeling connected? How am I getting settled? He was problem solving of who he could connect me to in this area. It had nothing to do with the business reason for why I was calling him. And I got off the call, and at first I'm thinking, we're all so busy. I feel bad that I took up his time. And then I thought, man, I needed that. I needed someone to be like, what you're doing is tough, Tara. Stick it out. And how can we help you? So I think we could talk for 45 minutes about Rick, and still not finish the stories. I don't know if any of you have anything else to add. I think one of the other things I was sharing with you guys as we were prepping for this, I did a couple of weeks where I was making myself write down things I was grateful for because it was just that difficult. And when I looked through it, half of those things in that time in my life were Rick replied to my email and gave me these words of encouragement. I got a card from Rick today. That's just so not normal for the CEO of an organization, but it's one of those things that just makes you love him so much. So
And I love it because a lot of times with organizational leadership, they talk about the tone at the top. And I think the tone at the top of this organization has been that. It's been Rick. It's been that personal touch, the genuine care, and the true leadership of people. And it's been such a great opportunity to grow ourselves as members and as volunteers. We've had a great, great example.
Yes. And I'd like to end with one other story about Rick. Back in the early 2000s, when we first formulated the diversity committee, we visited NIGP headquarters in Herndon, and we met with Rick, and he gave us the opportunity to share our ideas and strategies with him of how we thought that the committee could be formed and some of the things that we could do. Well, one of the things that came out of that meeting, we expressed how when we looked at the website, we didn't see anyone that looked like us. Well, I can tell you now, when I look at the website, I see people that look like me. And that's just the type of CEO that Rick is, the type of person that wants all us to feel a part and to be seen. And for that, I'm grateful. So thank you.
I don't think we can end it any better, Bobby.
I agree.
Good afternoon, everybody. Kirk Buffington here with Radio NIGP. And I'm really excited to have with me for a brief discussion Charles Taylor, who is NIGP's Education Program Manager. And today we are talking about the 2025 virtual conference, our VCon. I'm very excited about it. I've been honored by being asked to make another presentation. So let's talk about it. Charles, what's going on with VCon this year?
Yeah, so we're excited for this event because in years past, this was devoted more towards introduction to procurement. And then NIGP, we developed the introduction to procurement course and, really thought, do we really need another intro event? And we saw other organizations, other entities elevating technology to its own event. And so that's when we got the idea that, it's as important as technology plays in procurement, it really needs its own event. And so that's this year for the first time, we will be doing a VCon Technology Innovation for the first time.
Great. I think that's really smart. And you're right. I have been asked to speak at some other organizations like GFOA, and I look at their programs, and there is a heavy emphasis on technology. And more, obviously, procurement needs that, especially with the number of new folks that keep coming into public procurement. So tell us a little bit about how the sessions are laid out.
So the way the sessions are laid out, you'll always have two sessions running concurrently. So for example, if one session doesn't really speak to you, then you can attend the other session. If you like both sessions, keep in mind that all sessions are recorded and they're offered for 60 days after the event. So you can definitely watch all of the sessions. And we start off on day one, which is April 29th, and we go for half a day, and we'll go half a day on the 30th, and then another half a day on the 1st. So it's 3 days. and the type of topics we're covering. We have kicking things off. We have, we're focused on technology that's important to public procurement. So we're kicking it off with responsible procurement of AI, because I know that's becoming something that procurement professionals are having to deal with more and more. We're also looking at technology and technology specifications, technology contracts, and then we're also going to be looking at procuring ERP systems. Cybersecurity is a big topic. And we're also going to be looking at how procurement can utilize AI to become more efficient. And we're also looking at e-procurement, how to take your entity and become, a little bit more advanced and so forth.
Great. And I will put a shameless plug in for me. Is on May 1st, the third day, I am doing a presentation on risk and cybersecurity and cyber insurance. So I'm really excited about that. As I shared with you just a few minutes ago, this will be the first time I'm presenting this material. So I'm really hoping that I, obviously want to hit it out of the ballpark. That's very little sports analogy. That's about as much sports I can do. So I assume registration is open.
Registration is open, and we'll have registration all the way up into the event, but we'd like for everyone to get in there, and we're excited for this first technology and innovation event.
Great. Anything else you'd like to share with the folks who are listening?
That's about all. Yeah.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you so much, Charles, for sharing a few minutes with us. Remember, VCon registration is open. VCon runs April 29th, April 30th, May 1st, as Charles laid out. Some great sessions and great subject topics of great interest to all of public procurement. Charles, thank you once again. And this is Kirk Buffington and Charles Taylor with Radio NIGP.
Hello, and welcome to Construction Junction. When we talk about risk in our contracts, we know that construction contracts inherently have all kinds of risk because we are contracting for somebody else to design it and then someone else to build it rather than having it done by our own forces. So what can we add to our construction contracts that will protect us from the various risks that are associated with a construction contract? Well, first we talk about insurance. Professional liability insurance for the A&E doing their job correctly and designing something that's not going to collapse. But we also limit risk in professional services by using the process of awarding contractors for A&E through qualifications-based and not price-based solicitations. We make sure that we hire high-quality contractors to design our facilities and transportation and other means of construction. When it comes to actual physical construction risk whether you do it through low bid or construction management at risk or even design build, or maybe you're using job order contracting, this is where we use bonds as well as insurance to help protect us. So when we talk about insurance, mainly another insurance that we add on top of the standard liability insurances is builder's risk. This protects your property while under construction to make sure that any damages that might happen during construction are covered. Now let's talk about the sureties. First, let me caveat, this is such a brief discussion on sureties, it's not that long. I highly encourage you to look into the learning labs that are being led by our very own Radio NIGP Kirk Buffington in regards to the different things that you need to know about sureties, to include case law related to them. Sureties are there to protect you. The first that you receive is your bid bond. That guarantees, or is supposed to help you guarantee, that the lowest responsive and responsible bidder will enter into a contract with you. Hopefully, that bid bond will cover the difference should that contractor decide not to contract with you once you make the decision to award. Now, another good thing about the bid bond is it also verifies that they have the financial stability and financial resources to be able to enter into a contract with you for the full project. Now, when we start talking about payment performance bonds, of course, payment bonds are to ensure that the prime contractor pays their subcontractors, and performance bonds are guaranteeing that they'll perform the work. If not, the surety will ensure that the work gets completed on time. Now, when you're thinking about things such as task order or job order contracts, You may have a blanket bond, payment performance bond for the term of the contract, for each term of the contract. Or something else that we've added where I work is because that our ability to do construction work under our job order contracts exceeds the minimum amount required by the Virginia Code to enter into a payment and performance bond for a construction contract. I've added a paragraph to our surety paragraphs in the solicitation that then becomes part of the contract, that we reserve the right to ask for a separate payment and performance bond for any individual project that exceeds $500,000. This further protects our organization should something go wrong on a larger project that may happen now under the new job order contracting thresholds. This was just a brief example of how we can limit or protect ourselves from risk in construction contracts. Thank you, and I hope you have a great day.
Hello, and welcome to Way to Grow, NIGP Mentorship Moment. This month, we're focusing on the area of uncertainty in the marketplace and how to grow our knowledge about uncertainty. And I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Beavis, who will be co-hosting today's segment and may also be seen hosting the interactive NIGP Headliner Series webinar titled Tariffs and the New World Order, What's a Buyer to Do? At 2 p.m. Eastern Time on April 16th. That's free to NIGP members, and to register, you can go to nigp.org/events/NIGP Headliner Series to register. But if you're viewing our segment today after that date, you can look in the archive by going to nigp.org and searching under webinar recordings to view the webinar. So Mike, welcome to Way to Grow.
Thank you, Keith. I appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate mentioning the webinar. Thank you.
And you're welcome. And we're also honored to be joined by our guest, Paul Brennan from Rockland County, New York, and president of ProcurePath, who's recently written an article titled Local Governments Must Proactively Navigate Tariffs, Uncertainty in Contracting, which outlines strategies for local governments to address tariff uncertainty. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Keith. Good morning, Mike. Glad to see both of you again. Looking forward to talking about the current uncertainty that we're all seeing in reference to the tariff situation.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start asking a question to Mike, general question. And my question is how does this type of uncertainty impact public procurement?
Well, thanks, Keith. And I think it's important to understand what the uncertainty is, and what the uncertainty is price uncertainty, right? We don't know what the cost of products will be tomorrow or the next day. And when we're in that kind of environment, we have several choices. We can transfer price risk to the contractors, in which case we pay a risk premium, or we can retain that risk and create methods to manage it. In this case, it's much like fuel and other kinds of risky price areas where it's hard to know how to control it, right? I know vendors can't control whether or not there are tariffs, and buyers can't control whether or not there are tariffs. So economically, we would assume that risk, but assuming that risk raises a question of, well, what could be at risk from tariffs? And it's so broad that, it includes construction, because it'll be softwood and gypsum and things from Mexico and Canada. It'll be hard goods. It'll be electronics. It'll be all those things. And whether risk premiums are built into pricing or not is an important aspect of the marketplace to consider, and approaches we can take to manage that risk, or to at least minimize the impact of that risk, are important. And I know in Paul's article, he did a great job of outlining the broad categories of approaches that can be taken. And with that, I'd like to turn the conversation to Paul and ask, what solicitation and contracting strategies can public procurement practitioners incorporate to address the underlying uncertainty of tariffs?
Thanks, Mike. I covered a number of things in the article. I mean, first and foremost, which I didn't touch on in the article, is really market research. public procurement practitioners have to do more market research. We need to know where the products are coming from that we're going to go out and buy. So it's certainly going to be, easier in our entire strategy if we know up front that the items that we're purchasing most likely may have tariffs associated with them. But there's a number of strategies that we can look at in terms of increasing transparency in supplier pricing, prevent excessive price padding. And Mike talked about transfer of risk. When government tries to transfer most of or all the risk to the suppliers, prices are going to go up. All right. And where this is really under no one's control, either the supplier or the local government, it's best that we share that risk going forward. We should allow for price adjustments. So we need to make sure that we have clauses in our solicitations and contracts that allow for price adjustments, only when justified. The suppliers have to be able to provide the backup that the actual tariff is applied to this project. And also we want to make sure that we benefit if the tariff is reduced. So this means we're going to have to monitor our contracts that we know that have tariffs applied to them, because if the federal government all of a sudden reduces the tariff because they've come to a trade agreement with a specific company, we need to go back and make sure we have the proper clauses in the contract so we can ask for that reduction. So those are some of the broad categories of strategies that we can apply.
That's great. I really appreciate your comment about market research. We, in fact, had an incident just last week where chairs we had purchased on a bid turned out were being imported from Canada, and the vendor came to us with a price adjustment request.
Yeah.
And it turned into a negotiation, and we wished we'd had different clauses by then, right? So we've been working hard on developing those clauses and using your models to guide that.
Yeah.
So,
And I've seen suppliers, already asking for price increases or to be let out of a contract based upon the uncertainty, all right, and the potential. But we didn't let them out of the contract. We said we would address the tariff if and when the tariff comes to fruition.
Right.
So Paul, how can these strategies mitigate the risk and uncertainty of tariffs?
Well, if you look at some of the things that you can do in terms of putting clauses into contracts, certainly if suppliers don't feel your terms and conditions provide that flexibility, one of the end results is that they don't bid and you may receive less competition. So having these types of clauses, such as either making separate pricing lines for the product itself and then the applicable tariff, so you have more transparency, all right, of what the actual product clause is and a transparency clause is. You want to make sure you have a good adjustment clause, all right, that if in fact the tariff is applied and can be verified, then we can go ahead and make those adjustments. Having these type of clauses in your contracts will still encourage competition. And that's really one of my major concerns is, are we going to see a decrease in competition because suppliers are going to be very wary of locking in prices. And that's what governments ask for all the time, is to lock in prices for a particular period of time.
Well, it's going to be quite an interesting time. We're going to be going through the next few months. Paul, I know you told me about a resource that might be really good.
Sure. Public procurement practitioner is going to have to learn about something that the federal government calls HTS, which is the Harmonized Tariff Schedule. And this is on a website. You can go to the United States International Trade Commission website, and they will have information about the Harmonized Tariff Schedule. Interesting enough, it was down late yesterday afternoon while they were announcing the new tariffs, and is under maintenance this morning to reload all the current tariffs. But this is where you'll find all the current tariffs by country, all right, and by product category. So it'll show you exactly by product category what the tariff is. The good thing is if you go to that website, there is an online tutorial course that you can take to learn how to use this tariff schedule. But it's definitely something that public procurement practitioners are going to need to look at to be able to make the informed decision of whether a supplier is entitled to a tariff adjustment or not.
Okay, and we'll include that URL. It's https learning.usitc.gov/hts-guide/index. And we'll put that URL at the bottom of the screen for all of our audience. So I want to thank you, Paul, for joining us today. And Mike, I enjoyed having you as a co-host as well.
I appreciate being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, Keith.
Well, that just about does it for this month's segment. So I want to thank Paul for joining us and to Mike for being a great co-host today. And I want to thank our audience for joining in as well. And as always, I want to remind everybody that you can find the NIGP Mentorship Program as well as our mentorship Facebook page at www.nigp.org/mentorship. So now this is Keith Glatt speaking and hoping that you'll join me soon here on Radio NIGP for our next segment of Way to Grow, and reminding you that this is Radio NIGP.
Hello, friends. I hope that you have enjoyed the past 2 months as we have explored risk and the variety of perspectives that we've each brought to that conversation. So last month, I gave you a teaser about a real example that will hopefully make risk just come full circle in your mind. So most of us drive a car, or we had to learn at some point. We have kids, nieces, nephews, grandchildren that are learning to drive a car. And we know that the stress that comes with that and the risks that come with that can be pretty high. So we're going to talk about that as our example today. So the first thing when we're trying to figure out a risk is let's identify what that risk is. And today in our example, that risk is what are some of our risks for a teenage driver? It could be an accident. It could be damage to the car, damage to another car. It could be injuries to themselves or someone else. It could be a speeding ticket. Definitely increased fuel and insurance costs. You don't know where they're going, who they're with. There's several risks there, but you also then have to look at the probability. Will it happen? Some are more likely than others, and some you hope won't happen at all. And then you have to consider the impact. What's the result if it does happen? So when we're considering this, the first thing that we can do is we can say, as we've identified our risk, maybe we want to choose to eliminate it. We're not going to let our teenager drive at all. We're going to buy them a bike. We're going to drive them around ourselves and be Uber or us. We can have them ride with friends. It's often the easiest, but it's not necessarily the most practical. Next up, mitigate. That means we're going to make this a little bit less severe, serious, or painful. We're going to let them drive, but we're going to ensure that they wear their seatbelts. Maybe we send them to a driver training class. Maybe we give them an old car. If we think about this in contracting language, this might look like liquidated damages as an option. Another thing we can do with our risk is insure against it. And that sounds pretty self-explanatory. Our insurance levels are definitely going to depend on the amount of the risk. Again, it's not a one size fits all. There is no standard. The amounts that we choose for those insurance will need to correspond to how high or how low the risk is, because the more we ask for our suppliers to pay for more insurance, the more they're going to pass that cost on to us. We could also transfer that risk over to our teenager, making them responsible for getting their own insurance, buying their own car. In our contract world, historically, we have asked our contractors to absorb the majority of the risk. But again, remembering that does come at a cost. And the last thing we can do when we have risk is just simply assume it. We've done all that we can do, and we're going to accept the remaining risk. We're going to let them drive. We may take on yoga or find some other things to keep our mental health in a good state, but we're just going to assume the rest of the risk. And hopefully, as you've enjoyed the past 2 months broadcast, you've also learned some helpful tips that made you go, how am I going to fix this next time I'm dealing with risk? Until next time, friends, take care and keep minimizing that risk.
So Mr. Beavis 2 weeks ago said that he was going to talk about tariffs and was looking for anything that John or Kirk or Valerie wanted to add to that, because he said we haven't been looking at tariffs as risks, but interestingly enough, if you had a chance to see it, Paul Brennan posted a fantastic discussion of putting different terms about tariffs in your documents.
Where was that posted, Barb?
I saw it on LinkedIn.
Okay. Yeah.
I saved the document, so I saved what he posted. I can send it to you, and then you can put it up there.
That would be wonderful, Keith, if you could do that.
We got our first quote for some furniture that we were trying to buy from a furniture supplier that was on a cooperative this week that had subject to tariffs and other things on there. And of course, we kicked it back because that's not in accordance with the language that's in the cooperative contract that we're using. So yeah, we'll see what happens with all that.
What's the lead agency said?
I don't know. I didn't read it. I saw it and I asked my supervisor how that went. And she said that they went back and looked at the contract. There's a little bit of language in there, but the language that the contractor put on their quote was not the same as what was in the contract. So,
this is COVID supply chain all over.
Yep. On the other hand, and I'm not being political here. On the other hand, policy. If you're this day and you're this the next day, it is hard to keep up. And I'm not just talking about us. I'm talking about suppliers, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So it's anyway.
So, Kirk, I'm glad you said that. I mean, I think that was a little bit of a thread from the conversation before when Mike brought it up, that it's a lot like COVID. But what else? I'm kind of drawing a blank as far as legally speaking. Does it spark a thought for you or Valerie?
Well, I've been wrapping my head around it, and it's a tough. Ultimately it's a tough nut to crack, because the vendors, the suppliers are not going to take it on the chin. They're just not going to.
Nor should we make them.
Nor should we make them. So how hard we want to enforce our contract is ultimately the decision that each agency is going to have to make.
Okay.
Is it a necessary? Is it mission critical? Is it, well, we really want to have it, but we can wait? It's all those kinds of things that, and I think to some extent in the very beginning, I can support that this was an unknown issue. However, it's now known. So if you're entering into new contracts, don't let the vendor say, well, we didn't know, we're going to put it in there. No, So that's kind of where my head is going.
Well, Valerie, did you have a?
Yeah, so we've had an interesting one with trying to order a transformer that is, to the tune of $2 million, and it's assembled in Mexico.
Ooh.
And the supplier has said, well, maybe there will be tariffs, maybe there won't be. And there's been this conversation about, well, does the contract language need to say something, or will it even matter if at the time they're shipping it over the border, it gets a tariff imposed on it anyway? Should they be pricing it with that extra 20%? Is it a force majeure? So I think there are a lot of questions we cycled through on this. We'll figure it out, right? That's what we do in procurement. We always figure it out.
Well, in force majeure, you'd have to go back to your force majeure contract and see if that sort of thing would be included.
Yes,
I haven't seen
and
many that it is.
That's absolutely correct. I mean,
Don, you look like the cat that swallowed the canary. You got a word on this?
No, I'm just
okay.
I understand exactly what's being said, and I guess my thinking is like Kirk is saying, it's not a surprise. It should be in your contracts. How are you going to handle tariffs? How are you going to handle price adjustments? And I guess the thing I'm looking for from, all of you and people across the country is, what is the language that can be used that gives you a good CYA, but doesn't throw the suppliers out in the cold? I mean, bottom line is we all have to survive this, whatever this is. And we've got to come up with ways to survive it within our contracts. We can't be having contracts and saying, oh, crap, they've got to charge us 20% more. We got to throw the contract out. Well, government can't shut down. Well, excuse me. Most government can't shut down.
Oops.
And it's just, I guess that's the look on my face. I had a discussion with my daughter the other day, and she was talking about the fact that gas prices in her area, go up and down 20, 30, 40 cents every other day. And I said, well, it's just like everything else right now. We can't predict the future. And when I say the future, I mean tomorrow. And she says, no, the future is 30 minutes from now.
Yeah.
So enough said.
That's okay. Go ahead.
I've been, in my mind, I've been thinking about equitable price adjustment clause, but a lot of us don't have that. I mean, that's a clause that's usable possibly, but I look at a lot of agency solicitations, and that is not a clause that you generally find in most of our contracts.
And that's part of the problem. If you're going fixed price, then you're stuck with fixed price unless you do some sort of economic adjustment, or you've got some sort of wording to be able to, if it fluctuates beyond a certain point, we'll discuss and adjust with proof or something. But
part of the problem is the maturity of the administrations, the city councils, the legislators, in fact, even some of our legal counsel, who refuses to allow and enter into the idea of flexibility.
Yeah, that's very true.
They look at it as government is already being looked at as being wasteful and spending left and right, and for you to allow prices to go up, willy-nilly is, not in the best interest of the taxpayer. So therefore, stick with the way you've always done it. Buy that lowest bid and just go back to, carbon paper.
Chrissy, thank you.
So the thing I'm thinking of on this one, obviously being in construction procurement, we have things that have been under construction for years, and so this obviously wasn't known at the time. This isn't unknown, but I also can foresee us denying change orders and such. And then, so now it's going to be a weight of which is more expensive, the tariff or the claims court, which is going to cost us more in the long run to do this. Does our budget support it? Is our budget going to be able to, yes, we have a significant CIP budget. And we have a even more significant CIP contingency to cover for some of these things. But the problem is, even now, projects that we're bidding out right now, they don't know how much this stuff is going to be going up. They don't know how long it's going to be going up. So can they accurately bid and know at the time that they bid if they're bidding a project we literally have out on the street over the next month or so? And that's where it's kind of this whole balancing act of weighing of how much it is, and who, how do we determine? Because I remember, when I started at Fairfax here at Loudoun County in early 2021, I awarded to a contractor that was building a group home for me. And at one point he actually he asked for a change order because PVC piping had gone up like by 100% within a matter of 2 months after I awarded the contract. He didn't know that was going to happen at the time. And, and it was like, well, you're going to have to take us to claim, what are we going to do? Do our budget support it? I know most school budgets in Virginia don't, because their funding, there's no flexibility in their funding, the way we have it at the county level. So it's just a very interesting, and like I said, I'm just sitting back and watching it. Gordian Group just put out their first quarter of 25 report on construction costs. And it's interesting because while everybody likes to say steel is going up, it's not steel that's going up. It's the framing lumber. Steel has stayed pretty consistent. Framing lumber's gone up 17%, and things like that. So there are other things that we're tracking. Also the loss of labor, finding the people to actually do the work. So that adds a whole extra quirk into it. So
I could maybe see, legally speaking, doing, like maybe Valerie used the transformer as a case study, but then kind of angle it to what Christy and Kirk said. It's kind of like, well, here's your risks. I mean, this is mostly about price volatility and how do you deal with that in general. But we can also talk about, well, are you ready to go to court? Do you have, have you figured out 20% tariff? Is that more than the likelihood of the supplier taking us to court if you try and force them to use the same, if they're trying to get out of the contract? So we could maybe talk about that angle, but it seems like it's more about how do public procurement people do strategic procurement, around price volatility. Who was that guy? Remember in the print, the public purchaser, he was always writing articles about energy prices. I can't remember if it was gas or electricity, I think. And he's talking about how
yes, there was someone who always did that.
Yeah, he keeps showing up over, and he was always talking about when things go up and down, here's what you should do in your contracts. It seems like that's what the main angle on tariffs is like, okay, this could easily happen. How should we set up our contracts? And set up our, plan B, and how do we do our budgeting and all of that sort of stuff?
So John kind of touched on this. I think it also brings in Tara's comment. I think talking with our agencies about how we budget for unforeseen changes, because the contingency sometimes is like, oh, well, we'll just have a 5% contingency. Well, when things are really volatile, maybe we should be relooking at those contingencies, because if we could barely scrape enough money together to buy the transformer because it was already over budget, and now we're looking at a potential unforeseen circumstance with what are the tariffs going to be. I think we have to look at the bigger picture about how do we help our agencies plan better for the unforeseen incidents.
And I think that was one of Michael's angles. And he was sort of like Tara, and like you were saying, is, uncertainty is not new. But anyway, it's just, here's another opportunity. Tariffs are high profile. Tariffs being high profile means, okay, procurement, how are you going to handle it? And the opportunity, just like during COVID, to say, we got this. All right.
Really quick before we move on, I just, when Val was talking, it kind of got me thinking, even just maybe for Christy's segment, or when you talk about the unforeseen, I think it comes up more frequently in construction projects, the project contingency. Mm-hmm. And you have administrations that tend to like limiting contingency to no more than 5%, and we've got multiple capital improvement projects going right now. We've got a new build construction that we have a pretty small contingency on relative to the total cost of the building, but we're also renovating our historic courthouse, which is one of the oldest courthouses in our state for sure. And that one we have a massive contingency on, and we're even afraid that we're going to run into problems with it, because once they started uncovering things, they found CMU wall where we didn't think that it was going to be CMU. We found asbestos in some areas.
What's CMU?
Now you're going to ask me. I can't remember.
Okay, so I'm sorry.
Basically block wall where we thought it was just frame and
okay,
concrete
and sheetrock. And then
masonry unit.
There, thank you. I'm like, why can't I think of the words? Thank you. And then we also had issues with, in the 40s, what was structurally sound and acceptable in construction is not the same thing now. So I've got like horror stories of pictures of the way that like walls were spliced together and 2x4s were nailed together. And so as we continue to uncover things, we're just finding more and more that we were not reasonably aware of, that the contractor could not be reasonably aware of. And so I think Val's point on how do you have the strategic conversation with your customers and really talk through each project really should stand on its own, and what's an acceptable contingency, how do you plan for it, is huge. And this one was not a popular one to stand before our board and say, but it was one of the things that we pushed for. Like, either I'm going to have to come back to you 20 times, or you're going to have to understand that this is a reasonable contingency for this project.
As you described it, there used to be a show on HGTV called Homes on Homes. Yes. And this guy was like, home construction was like opening a really bad Pandora's box. Everything that, could go wrong went wrong.
And add that to renovations, and you're making designs off of as-built from 30 years ago. And there's just a lot of things that no one can reasonably be aware of until you start the work.
Indeed.
Or no building permits for them originally.
Yippee.
I think one of the other things as well, I mean, that, the comment in the post about, the tariffs are the hot issue of the moment, but changes happen all the time. That's very true. When you think back to what's happened, it's not just tariffs now. It happens to be that kind of the peak of the mountain at the moment. But, with the Russia-Ukraine war and with other conflicts going on, and political decisions between countries on the international front, we've also got embargoes. But we've had a lot of this stuff, right? And fossil fuel prices being, just kind of all over the board at times. There's a fellow that I follow on LinkedIn, Jason Miller, and he's done a lot of posts around fluctuation in a lot of things, trucking industry, different imports coming from different countries, and how tariffs and shipping and all that sort of stuff is impacting them. So it gives it a much broader scope. But that's part of what we're dealing with now, right? Is also the shipping, because how do we get it from point A to point B?
Yes.
And the fuel costs associated with that. And of course, then, anyone who's doing the environmentally friendly thing and talking about carbon footprint, that's just another expense you're looking at if you're buying carbon points, if that's a program that you're into. So much bigger. Hello, kitty cat.
Oh, yes.
Bring us back down to earth. So Bobby and Stacy, as she's talking about this and we're having this conversation, I can feel my anxious level get higher. What should I be doing? Should I be breathing deep? Yeah.
You should do 3 4-corner box breathing. In 4, hold 4, out 4. Do a couple of those.
Okay.
I just like to add, I don't need to agree, but I agree with everything that everyone is saying. But what I see is different is that all of these things are happening at the same time.
Yeah.
Before it was happening one at another, so you had an opportunity to prepare and put a plan together. But now all of these things are happening at the same time. So it makes it difficult to even develop a strategy, because as soon as you sit down to develop a strategy, the next day something else has changed. So I think that's one of the major differences in what we're seeing now, is how it's all happening at once and it's constantly changing.
What's the name of that movie?
It's more like whack-a-mole.
Everything, everywhere, all at once. Is that the
Yes.
name of that movie?
Yes.
Well, really good point. Really good point,
And
Bobby.
I'm curious if I can pile on a little bit here too. Just, in terms of things that are happening, I'm recognizing in my old agencies in the neighborhoods that I still track with, them using phrases like structural deficits again. I'm hearing phrases I haven't heard since the recession of 08 and 010, where government agencies are speaking out loud about reductions in force again. And that's all going down at the same time.
Yes. I'm gonna not an economist by any means, but I have lived through dealing with the aftermath of hurricanes in the marketplaces after that. I'm sure, Kirk, you have as well. And I am going to predict that the recent fires in California are going to have a considerable impact on the construction industry. Labor, materials, everything else, even though we're mostly in commercial building, we're going to see a real strain on the economy in terms of being able to get materials, being able to get labor to handle materials, because everybody's is gonna run out to California where they're trying to build their multi-million-dollar houses again.
True.
And the money's gonna be there for that. But what we want to do, we're gonna have trouble finding contractors. I don't know, Christy, have you seen any of that yet?
Yeah. Yeah. We've been actually, I mean, even in our job order contracting, I had a conversation with a contractor that didn't get such a great evaluation. Of course, none of us knew about it because the end user didn't communicate anything to us. And he was talking about stuff that happened months ago. But come to find out, he says, here's the other thing. He goes, the workforce is not the same as it was several years ago. They're not as dedicated to show up to a job. They're not as dedicated to be there every day, or if it's raining or if it's hot. And so even though they might get subcontractors and have them and hire them to do it, sometimes they just don't show up. And there's nothing much we can do about it,
And there's also the immigration issue.
Right, exactly.
Our economy depends on immigrants.
Yes. Well, and I live in an area, that has orchards and such. And the last time the administration was like this, they lost a lot of the people that would harvest the orchards and stuff around here and all the farms around here. And I know it's the same out in California and other places, but yeah, no, the biggest thing is it's not just the materials fluctuations and everything. It's also finding the qualified people to do the work, because number one, people aren't entering the trades like they used to. We had that gap, where people just weren't going into the trades. Everybody's going, go to college, don't go to a trade school. So we don't have them. And then the ones that we do get, like I said, they just don't have the same work ethics as their predecessors. And so they don't show up.
So, Christy, those comments apply in Canada as well, because I mean, we have farm workers who come in just for the picking season, right? So just for the harvest. So strawberries, you will not see a Caucasian in the fields, not one.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. And the comment, and I hate to say it, but the comments that the immigrants are taking your jobs, no, because you wouldn't take that job anyway, and that's why they're available.
We have a berry farm right next door. They used to offer jobs routinely to university students from Trent as a summer job.
And they wouldn't do them.
They would not do them because it's too hard to work, backbreaking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I think, and honestly, I think some of it too. Like I said, I say this because my future son-in-law has lost most of his income through layoffs, and he's been trying to find a job. But I think there's also a thought process in some of the younger generation, unlike some of the older generations, and I'll even say mine, that are willing to do whatever it takes until you get to where you want to be. I mean, here I was laid off with 2 master's degrees, and I went back to waitressing because, you know what? It was a job I could get that was a mile from the house, so I didn't spend a lot of money getting there. And I did that. And that job led me to the person who got me on board at the Department of Interior as a contractor, which is where I found procurement. And it was all because I took the chance and did a waitressing job. But my future son-in-law is not willing to go take whatever job he can get to make anything versus nothing, because he's looking for that little niche market that he's a part of, that he and his brother both got laid off from. I think there's just a lack of a, I don't know. I don't know whether it's a lack of drive or just a lack of understanding or what, but there's a gap there.
The generation just sees life differently than we do, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And some of it is the generation that raised them. Like, everybody doesn't want to make the mistakes that their parents made. And so you see it shift all the time based on, what did you see your parents do? What did you see your parents struggle with? And so I hate it when we try to like label a generation as lazy or
well, that's not what I was doing, but
no, I know.
I mean, they are different.
Yeah.
I mean, they're my,
They are.
I look at my own daughter, right?
Yeah.
And in college, she worked 3 jobs that I did not tell her she had to work, right? That was just her.
Mm-hmm.
Now she has 2 and will not work on Sundays because I need a day to myself, and I'm just like, but you also need to pay rent. You got your own place.
Right. Well, see, and that's the thing. I see my daughter watched me do those things at those ages, and she'll go get whatever job she needs to get her through. But her fiance, who was raised in a different environment and has always had that support, always had somebody there to pick, doesn't know to do that, doesn't know how to do that. And I think those of us that struggled and our children watched us struggle are more willing to step up and do those things. And so I think some of those people that just haven't experienced it don't know that they may have to do what they don't want to do to get to where they want to be.
Well, and I definitely wasn't implying that any of us were labeling somebody a certain way, but when people talk generational differences, I'm always careful to caution and say, like, that's a generalization that helps us like make sense of things, but everybody's a little bit different. And like, when people talk bad about millennials, I'm like, hey, I'm a millennial and I have a strong work ethic, but I also show up late with my coffee in my hand. Like, it's all about how you were raised and what the impacts are. There just tends to be similarities in some of the generations. And rather than talk about what we don't like in some of those generations, it's a matter of figuring out, how do we work with, how do we motivate? Because the reality is their worldview has formed them, and now we've got to figure out how to work with them and stay productive. So
I just thought it was interesting how my contractor was like, look, I hire subs, they don't show up, I don't know what to do, and I feel for him.
It's unfortunate. However, at the same time, I will say that my son, he is work-life balance guy. And I mean, he is definitely present and working hard when he is at work. But when he's not, he is not going to get sucked in on some issue that somebody else can handle, which, I admire, but at the same time, I'm like, why didn't I do that? Well,
exactly,
because I'm a sucker. That's why.
It is a weird adjustment.
It is. But I will tell you, even though I'm the same age as some of my coworkers, I'm like, look, I'm 5 years older than my purchasing agent, and I'm like, look, you don't have to do that.
Right.
I promise you, you made a choice to do some of that. You don't have to do all of it. I said, look, you got to take, and this poor woman has literally been sick since the 1st of January. She keeps catching one thing after another. And I'm like, this is because you don't have that. You need to stop and start taking care of yourself. If it doesn't, is it life or death if it doesn't get done? She's like, no.
I think that's something that a lot of people don't learn until they get older, because I have yet to see a tombstone that says should have spent more time at work.
Right.
A lot of those tombstones, people stand around it going, you know what, they work themselves to death. So having a work-life balance, I don't have any problem with that. But I spent yesterday doing supplier training with Amazon in Arlington, and they're all what they call capture managers, which are they kind of chase the new clients. So kind of like a souped up sales rep type of folks. And part of the discussion that we had was, how do they deal with some of their clients, because they aren't able to engage with some of them as they are with others. So that's exactly the discussion we had. figure out how they communicate, figure out what's important to them. How do you engage with them on a personal level? So, and I mean, I'm standing up there in front of them, right? And probably there were only 2 in the room that were within 20 years of my age. The rest of them are all, kids with laptops in front of them.
Right.
So, but so there was a mix of ages and a mix of what they did, but they all got it because they were really interested in how they can engage with people. And I think that's one of the things that we kind of forget sometimes, right? What
in the
cranks
public
somebody's track?
sector.
Find out what that is, and you can move on.